The atmosphere outside the old animal shelter was biting with the chill of winter, but within the lobby, a stillness settled that felt more oppressive than the cold. 6-year-old Emma Williams hovered just inside the entrance, her small fingers clutching the hem of her mother's coat. Her eyes were wide, quiet, and distant. They did not dart around as another child's might. Instead, they remained fixed forward, as if scanning for something she herself could not identify. Claire Williams, a former combat medic who was now a full-time mother, looked down at her daughter with subdued concern. It had been 8 months since the accident that had taken her husband, Captain Robert Williams, a training explosion no one had anticipated. And it had been exactly 8 months since Emma had spoken a word. "Let's just look," Claire whispered, more to herself than to Emma. Her voice was steady and practiced. She had learned to speak softly ever since Emma's silence had become their new normal. The shelter manager, a volunteer with a kind face named Janet, led them past kennels of eagerly barking dogs. Claire had read that animals, especially smaller ones, could be therapeutic for children experiencing grief. She had come in search of a gentle, adoptable pet that might reignite a spark in Emma's world. Yet, as they moved from one kennel to the next, Emma's expression remained unchanged. There was not one glimmer of interest, not a single glance, not even the slightest hint of a reaction. Janet gave them a reassuring smile. "We have a few more in the next hall. Maybe something will click." Claire nodded politely. Emma was still silent. Outside, the wind murmured across the leafless trees, and just past the staff door marked "Restricted," a silent connection was poised to be found, one that was about to change everything. The hallway became quiet as Claire paused to talk with Janet about the necessary paperwork. In that short interval, Emma released her mother's coat. Her feet carried her silently, almost as if guided by a force she could not comprehend. A gentle but resolute pull toward the side door she had been observing since they came in. A weathered metal sign declared "Restricted, Staff Only," but its latch was not fully engaged. Emma's tiny hand pushed it open without making a sound. Beyond the door was a dim, sterile, and cold corridor of the sort no one bothers to decorate. Fluorescent lights sputtered overhead, and the air carried a faint odor of antiseptic and fear. At the hallway's conclusion, a technician in scrubs was softly coaxing a weak German shepherd forward on a leash. The dog could barely walk. His ribs were stark beneath a patchy coat, and his legs quivered with each slow movement. There was no light in his cloudy eyes, only the flat haze of resignation. Emma froze. Something about the curve of his ears, his heavy gait, and the scar etched across his flank made her heart skip a beat. She knew him. "Stop," she whispered, but no one heard. Then, with more volume, her voice cracked from months of not being used. "Stop." The technician stopped short, surprised. Claire came rushing through the open door, her eyes filled with alarm. "Emma." But the little girl was already running, tears spilling as she wrapped her arms around the dog's frail body. "This is Daddy's dog," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "His name is Shadow." Claire stared, dumbfounded. The scar, the military tattoo on his ear, it seemed impossible, but it was him. And for the first time in months, Claire saw a flicker in Emma's eyes. Not just a memory, but a raw and real connection. Shadow, who had been nearly lifeless just moments earlier, raised his head and leaned into her embrace. The technician froze in place, baffled by the sudden outburst. What took him by surprise even more was the response from the dog, who was moments away from being taken to his final rest. Shadow's ears twitched, his head, heavy and limp just seconds before, now pressed gently against the little girl's chest. Claire knelt beside her daughter, setting a hand on Shadow's side. Her breath hitched when her fingers brushed against the coarse, faded ink concealed beneath his fur, a military service tattoo. Her husband had spoken of it once, long ago, during a quiet talk about his time overseas. "This was Robert's," Claire whispered. "This is his canine." Emma produced a small, wrinkled piece of paper from her coat pocket. It was a child's drawing with vibrant colors and shaky lines, but with clear words written across the top. "I will be your friend." She held it forward with both hands, her chin trembling. "He doesn't have anyone now," she said softly, tears shining on her eyelashes. "But I'll stay with him. Please don't let him go." A hush descended upon the hallway. Even the technician seemed uncertain, glancing hesitantly toward the intercom. A few moments later, the shelter director, Alan Ellis, appeared, looking stern, composed, and already irritated. "This dog is terminal," he stated flatly. "A 10% chance of survival. It's not humane to prolong this." But Claire stood up, creating a shield for both Emma and Shadow. "He's not just a dog. He's family." Ellis paused, his jaw tight. Then, slowly and with reluctance, he nodded. Shadow had just received one final chance, because a little girl had remembered him when the world had forgotten. The ride home was quiet. Shadow lay curled on the back seat, swaddled in an old blanket Claire had stored in the trunk. His breathing was faint, each rise and fall of his chest a silent struggle. Emma did not take her eyes off him for a second. She sat near him, her hand resting on his paw for the entire journey, as if letting go would make him vanish once more. Through the rearview mirror, Claire observed them, her heart torn between a strange blend of fear and wonder. This was not the small, cheerful therapy animal she had anticipated taking home. This was a soldier, injured and fading, but in Emma's eyes, he was something more. When they got home, Claire carried Shadow inside, as he was too frail to manage the stairs. She placed him on a plush cushion in a corner of the living room beside the fireplace and put down bowls of water and soft food, which he barely acknowledged. Emma immediately went to work. Without being asked, she fetched her softest blanket and gently tucked it around him. Then, with remarkable tenderness, she soaked a cloth in warm water and started to clean the grime from his coat, her small fingers moving slowly and deliberately. She whispered to him as she worked, speaking soft, fragmented sentences that only he could hear. Claire remained in the doorway, a mug of now-cold tea in her hands, unwilling to break whatever delicate magic was taking place before her. And then, just as it was time for bed, she heard it, a sound that had been absent for nearly a year. Laughter, faint and short, like a tune trying to find its way back. Claire glanced toward the living room and saw Emma snuggled up next to Shadow, both of them, at last, and if only for a moment, at peace. It occurred just after midnight. Claire had dozed off into a fitful sleep on the sofa, the fire embers glowing faintly. Emma was asleep in her bed upstairs, although she had insisted on bidding Shadow goodnight on 3 separate occasions before finally shutting her eyes. The house was silent until it wasn't. A sharp thud, followed by a low, guttural moan, startled Claire from her sleep. Her gaze shot to the corner where Shadow had been. He was having a seizure, his limbs convulsing violently and his body contorting into unnatural positions. Foam was visible at the sides of his mouth, and his eyes, once dim but calm, were now wide and unfocused. Claire reacted on pure instinct. She fell to her knees, cradling his head and repeating his name. "Stay with me, Shadow. Please stay with me." Emma materialized at the top of the stairs, barefoot with wide eyes. She did not cry or scream. She simply ran. By the time Claire had loaded Shadow into the back of the car, Emma was already buckled in next to him, gripping the edge of the blanket as if her hold alone could keep him intact. At the emergency veterinary clinic, time seemed to lose all meaning. Dr. Hannah Tran, a neurologist known for her directness, assessed Shadow while Claire and Emma waited in a small, windowless room that smelled of bleach and anxiety. When the doctor finally came in, her expression was grim. "He's suffered a severe neurological episode," she stated quietly. "Multiple systems are failing. His body's fighting, but it doesn't look good." Claire slumped into a chair. Emma did not stir. Morning light began to filter through the blinds of the waiting area as Claire sat with her head in her hands. Emma had eventually fallen asleep, curled on a chair with her small fingers still wrapped around the edge of Shadow's tattered blanket. Claire hadn't slept, not after Dr. Tran's diagnosis and not after recognizing a troubling pattern. Shadow's symptoms, the timing of their onset, and the neurological damage that felt too severe for simple trauma, something was not right. That was when Maria Ramirez showed up, a former veterinary tech from Oak Ridge. Maria had come to the clinic quietly after hearing about Shadow's collapse. Her face was pale and her voice was low. "I shouldn't be here," she started, "but I know what's happening to him, and I can't be silent any longer." She gave Claire a manila folder filled with documents, emails, and photos. Inside were detailed notes from Oak Ridge's internal records, including medical charts signed by the shelter's director, Alan Ellis. Claire leafed through the pages, her heart racing. Shadow's name was on a list with 13 other dogs, all designated non-adoptable and all injected with a drug called NTX-17, an experimental compound from a private pharmaceutical company. They were using the shelter to test it, Maria explained. Untraceable trials, no supervision. NTX-17 was meant to be a sedative, but in large doses, it triggers delayed neurological collapse. They injected Shadow 28 days ago. Claire's breath caught in her throat. That's why he started seizing. Maria nodded. They never intended for him to survive. That's why they were rushing his euthanasia, to hide the evidence. Claire's fists tightened. This was more than just neglect. It was a betrayal. Shadow had served, protected, and risked his life for his country, and this was his reward. Later that morning, based on Maria's testimony and Claire's evidence, the police served a warrant at Oak Ridge. They discovered the locked cabinet, which contained rows of vials marked NTX-17, signed inventory sheets, and a detailed logbook in Ellis's own handwriting that recorded every illegal injection, including Shadow's. By noon, Alan Ellis was in handcuffs, led away from the shelter without a word. Justice, however small, had started its course. By late afternoon, the clinic had grown quiet. The morning's turmoil of arrests and legal consultations had settled into a kind of hushed respect. In the intensive care unit, Shadow lay motionless, connected to machines and wires that beeped and flashed like delicate signals of hope. Claire sat next to him, feeling numb, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Emma was there as well, sitting on a small stool with her knees drawn to her chest, her gaze locked on Shadow's still form. He's tired, Dr. Tran had explained gently. The antidote might slow the compound's spread, but his body has already been through so much. He may not have the strength to pull through. Claire had nodded, but Emma showed no reaction. She didn't weep or run away. Instead, she cautiously climbed onto the bed. No one tried to stop her. She lay beside him again, just as she had the night before, with one hand placed over his heart and the other stroking the back of his ear. His breathing was so shallow that it barely rustled the fur beneath her palm. Then, Emma did something she hadn't done since the day they lost Robert. She started to sing. It wasn't loud or perfect, just a soft, shaky melody, a lullaby her father used to hum during long drives and on quiet Sunday mornings. Her voice trembled, but she continued, note by note, as tears streamed silently down her face. For a long while, nothing changed. Then, Shadow's ear twitched. His paw stirred, just slightly. The heart monitor emitted a soft beep, then another, followed by a pause, and then a steadier, stronger rhythm. Life, however fragile, was fighting back. Emma stopped singing and whispered, "You don't have to be strong alone anymore." Dr. Tran, who was watching through the glass, covered her mouth in disbelief. Claire leaned in, her heart pounding. And then, Shadow took one long, shuddering breath and opened his eyes. He was still with them. The days that came after were slow, cautious, and filled with quiet hope. Shadow stayed under close watch, his activity restricted, but the light had come back to his eyes. He followed Emma's voice with every look, his ears lifting at the sound of her footsteps. Each sign of progress, every time he lifted his head, every flick of his tail, felt like a triumph. Emma was always at his side. She read to him from her favorite picture books, held his paw as he slept, and whispered promises that only a child could make and mean with her entire being. Claire, observing from the doorway, noticed something else happening, too. Emma was talking, not just to Shadow, but to Claire, to Dr. Tran, and to herself. Her voice, once trapped by grief, had come back, not in long declarations, but in simple, daily sentences. He's hungry. He needs water. I think he likes this song. It wasn't just a recovery, it was a restoration. Shadow's files were examined and confirmed. His military tattoo, service record, and assignment with Captain Robert Williams were all verified. He had been listed as missing in action after the explosion, lost in the ensuing chaos, and moved to a public shelter without any identification. The Army dispatched an officer to present something Claire had not anticipated, a certificate of service and a Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously to Shadow for his actions in combat. Claire held it, her throat tightening. It was always meant to be his, she said. Emma placed the medal gently on Shadow's blanket and whispered, "Welcome home." And Shadow, still weak but attentive, rested his head beside her hand, and closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in peace. For the first time in a very long time, everything felt complete again. The sky was gray on the morning they went to visit Robert's grave. Claire parked the car at the edge of the military cemetery, where lines of white headstones stood like silent guardians of the past. Emma got out first, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered herself. Shadow followed, his gait slower but sure, more confident than it had been in weeks. He walked beside them without a leash. Claire carried only her own thoughts. They paused at the stone inscribed with Captain Robert James Williams. Emma laid the flowers softly at its base, then reached into her coat pocket for the wrinkled drawing she had held onto for so long, the one she had shown Shadow at the shelter. "I will be your friend," she said, placing it next to the flowers. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, Claire knelt quietly beside her daughter. "He would have been so proud of you, sweetheart. Of both of you." Emma looked up, her eyes holding something more profound than sorrow, something like acceptance. Shadow stepped forward and lowered his head to the stone. He sniffed it once, then sat down, silent and watchful, as if standing guard over his former handler one final time. He then let out a single, low bark. It wasn't loud or desperate. It sounded like a report. Mission complete. Claire stood up, reaching for Emma's hand. The little girl accepted it, and together they turned to go, Shadow following just behind them, as loyal as ever. As they walked back through the quiet rows of marble, Claire glanced down at Emma, her voice warm and steady. "We're home now, sweetheart, and we're whole again." And in that moment, under a gray sky and in the stillness of remembrance, the heaviness of grief yielded to something stronger, something that would last: love.